Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be reading an article from Business Insider. We might get to a second one too, both on Russia. And the first article is on how Russia gets richer amid a raging war while the West loses trillions. So Russia is right now outcompeting the entirety of the West, where the West has trained, supplied, given equipment to, given funding to prop up the government and the population as a whole to Ukraine. And Russia, all by its little self, is out-manufacturing the entirety of the West. And the West is even sending some troops over as mercenaries. And Russia's just winning nonstop. So Russia added 600 billion of total wealth last year, a report by UBS indicated. The number of millionaires and ultra-high net worth individuals also rose despite the war in Ukraine raging on. Meanwhile, the US and Europe shed trillions of dollars worth of wealth, the Swiss bank reported. So we can clearly see that the United States is just not winning in Ukraine, which is embarrassing because Russia isn't even the final boss. It's actually China. And so the United States and the entire West is losing against Russia when there's an even bigger juggernaut of manufacturing capacity in China. And so, yeah, the West is clearly doomed. Yeah, I mean, all available signs support that. Let's read the rest of this article there. Russians got richer last year, even as the war raged. Okay, so we can skip that. The number of Russian millionaires also rose by 56,000. U.S. lost more wealth than any country last year. Wow, shedding 5.9 trillion, while North America and Europe combined got 10.9 trillion poorer. There were also 1 million fewer American millionaires by the end of 2022. Okay, Russia's wealth gain came despite its invasion of Ukraine in February, which has led to the West imposing sanctions on the Kremlin. That led to its economy shrinking and triggered a slump for Moscow listed stock. So that obviously did not work because Moscow is doing so well right now. The UBS acknowledges that wealth trends in Russia are difficult to determine at this time, but did highlight it as one of the handful of countries that have gotten richer in 2022. So again, Russia completely sanctioned, completely cut off from everything Western-led, the supposed international economy, which is really just the Western-led economy. And Russia got richer because of that. Rising oil prices could also be one factor behind the wealth increase, with exports of the commodity a key engine for Russia. The cost of a barrel of benchmark Urals crude jumped by about $7 last year, data from Refinitiv indicated. Mexico, India, and Brazil also added significant amounts of wealth in 2022. UBS's report suggested while the US, Japan, China, Canada, and Australia lost the most. Okay, so I think, is that the end of the article here? Let's see. Yeah, that's the end of the article. So we can clearly see that Western types of countries are doing extremely poorly. The only one here, China, which is a developing, growing country, a part of the multipolar bloc. That one, it's understandable why they did poorly because they had such stringent lockdowns. And so that's obviously turning around for the current year. And so, yeah, it seems like these countries, particularly countries like Russia, which are sanctioned by the West, are actually thriving instead of doing poorly. So I think we have time to go over this other article too. So Russia, they're building their own industry despite the sanctions. They are very successful in that regard. And so here we see an article from Asia Times, and it's called Russia Defies Sanctions with Homemade Sukhoi Superjet. So a Russian passenger jet built almost entirely with domestically manufactured components completed its first test flight on August 29th. And so Russia does not need Western-made parts. They're able to manufacture things domestically, in which case they can have jobs created for their own populace instead of having jobs created for Western populaces and to the benefit of the West. And so this Superjet aims to compete with Brazil's narrow-body, short to medium-range Embraer E190 on global markets. During the test flight, it climbed to a maximum elevation of 3,000 meters. Okay, we could skip some of that. Okay, so the original SSJ-100, constructed largely with foreign parts and components, first flew in 2008. About 40 imported systems and components have been replaced with Russian-made alternatives in the new version. Okay, so the sanctions help them in terms of creating domestic markets. So the indigenously made parts include the fuselage, avionics, flight control systems, and auxiliary power unit, as well as power supply, air conditioning, and fire protection equipment in plane's cabin. You'd also be interested interesting to know how many of the rest of the supplies that were created abroad, which there were a few, were from pro-Russia countries such as like China. I suspect that since there's so many sanctions on Russia right now, that all of their parts are coming from very strong allies of Russia, such as China. So not only are they making things domestically, the vast majority of the parts for this superjet, but the ones that they're not making domestically are from very close allies who are not going to be bullied by the United States. Okay, so we can see a comparison of China's COMAC C-19 passenger jet is instructed the C-19, which made its first commercial flight last year. So again, China is another one of those countries that's sanctioned by the West, and they're making their own domestic alternatives for things like passenger planes, and they're doing that with the C-19 here. The C-19, which made its first commercial flight last year, is assembled in China, but key components are procured from foreign suppliers, including big American aerospace companies and their joint ventures in China. Okay, so that's unfortunate. They still have key components from foreign suppliers, but I'm sure they're trying to replace that just like they're doing with the semiconductor chips in their phones, such as the 7nm chips, which they've finally started to mass produce. Okay, Chinese subcontractors supply the C-19's fuselage, wings, forged parts, and other basic components and materials. Let's see. Russia's aircraft import substitution program dates back to the imposition of restrictions on the export of products with military applications to Russia by the Bureau of Industry and Security of the U.S. Department of Congress before the Ukraine war. Okay. September 2018, restrictions were imposed on sales of carbon fiber materials to Russia's Aero Composite Corporation, a subsidiary of UAC. 2 years later, in December 2021, Russian aircraft manufacturer Irkut completed its first passenger aircraft with wings made from substitute materials produced by Aero Composite. Oh, okay. So they already, it took 2 years, no wait, 3 years for them to come up with a domestic alternative to the sanctioned materials that they previously were using. So sanctions help. It helps create a domestic economy, and it only takes a few years in most cases. Okay. So they replace it in the shortest amount of time possible. The CEO states, this is proof of the maturity of our aviation technologies and another victory over the sanctions. Yeah, they've had a ton of victories over sanctions so far. Okay, so Rostec is primarily a defense contractor, and they were sanctioned by the US and EU after Russia annexed Crimea in 2014. So that was a legitimate taking over of Crimea because the population was majority Russian or Russian speaking, and they voted to join Russia, which we know from the West is allowed because they did that with Kosovo and Serbia. Those sanctions have not apparently been successful either. On September 1st, 2023, Rostec announced that it had developed an Internet of Things software solution designed to control the status of armament, special purpose machines, and military objects from ships and vehicles to hospitals and garrisons, and to generate their digital twins. So they've figured out ways around various sanctions that the West has imposed upon them. In March 2022, soon after the invasion of Ukraine, France's Airbus and American Boeing shut down their operations in Russia. The sale of aircraft and spare parts, technical support, and maintenance were all officially terminated in line with the EU and US sanctions. About 70% of the passenger aircrafts operating in Russia were affected. Okay, so let's see what they did. So that was March 2022. In August 2023, Russia reported that at least $1.2 billion worth of parts have been shipped to Russia airlines via Turkey, the UAE, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, China. Nevertheless, when Russia's Minister of Industry and Trade that Russia needs to ensure technological sovereignty over critical parts. Rostec is also part of that. Okay, so it doesn't seem like they managed to replace those sanctions that occurred in March 2022. It might take a few more years for that. Okay, so they're making some other planes to be domestically produced. They're saying here and be competitive with international competitors. Okay, so they go on to say last February, Alexander Narodko, Director General of Russia's Federal Air Transport Agency, told media that Airbus and Boeing aircraft operated by Russian airlines could remain in service until 2030 if properly maintained. So they're able to maintain their own aircraft, which is very important here. That should be enough time for them to be replaced by entirely domestically made aircraft through production deadlines in Russia have a tendency to slip. Well, I mean, they're doing well so far when it comes to creating domestic alternatives to things. So I have a ton of faith in them being able to do that. So those are two articles on how Russia is doing given the sanctions. One is on how Russia defied sanctions when it comes to Superjet. Another is in terms of just overall wealth, how they're becoming more wealthy despite the sanctions. And so if you found this video to be helpful, to be informative, please give us a thumbs up. It helps us in the algorithm. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and Rumble for more content. And please leave us a comment in the comment box below. Questions, concerns, critiques. We read all of them. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.